When I came to the Dawn massage salon, I was expecting just an hour of relaxation after long weeks of work. Nothing more. The salon was small, but cozy. Dim lighting. A faint scent of lavender in the air. Soft music that seemed distant, like an echo in an empty forest. In the room, I was greeted by a massage therapist named Liz. It was my first time visiting her. And at first glance, she seemed quite ordinary. A young blonde woman with a gentle smile. We exchanged a few polite words. And I lay down on the massage table, closing my eyes. Liz's initial touches were confident and professional, just as you'd expect from an experienced masseuse. Her fingers glided effortlessly across my back, releasing the tension that had built up over the long days. At first, I simply enjoyed how the tightness in my shoulders gradually melted away under her skilled hands. But then, after a few minutes, something in her movements began to change. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but I sensed the atmosphere in the room becoming different. More personal. I didn't notice this shift right away. Just kept lying there with my eyes closed, lost in my thoughts. But soon, my body began to react differently to her touch. Transcribed, I could feel the warmth from her hands penetrating deeper than mere muscle relaxation. I couldn't understand why her movements were starting to evoke stronger sensations than just relief from tension. At first, it was just a strange feeling, which I attributed to tiredness. But the longer the session went on, the more I felt that something else was happening. Liz continued the massage, and I noticed her touch becoming slower and more focused. She lingered on certain areas a little longer than expected. Maybe it was just my imagination, I thought, trying to ground myself in reality. But every time her hands touched my back again, I started feeling a slight tremor. It was uncomfortable to admit it to myself, but I couldn't ignore the strange chemistry that seemed to hang in the air. "Is everything okay?" she suddenly asked. And her voice sounded a bit different than at the beginning of the session. "Yes. Of course," I quickly replied, trying to sound calm. But my voice betrayed me. There was a slight hesitation in it, and Liz seemed to catch it. Her fingers touched my neck again. And this time her touch was gentler, as if she was studying how my body would react to her further actions. I tried to relax and not pay attention to the strange sensation growing inside me. "It's just a massage," I kept telling myself. But still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. With every minute that Liz worked on my shoulders and back, I felt the tension between us rising, though I couldn't exactly explain where it came from. Everything seemed the same as in the beginning, but now I couldn't ignore what was in the air. When Liz asked me to turn onto my back, I felt the tension in the room become palpable. I tried to remain calm, but something in her gaze made me feel uneasy. Her touches were still confident, but now they carried a hidden subtext that I couldn't explain. With each new movement of her hands, I began to doubt more and more that this was just a regular massage. She focused on my shoulders, her fingers gently sliding over my skin, releasing tension. But at the same time, I felt them lingering slightly longer than necessary. Occasionally, our eyes met, and I saw something new in her gaze. It was as if her smile was a bit more mysterious than before, and her touch is more intimate. "Relax," she whispered, her voice lower, softer than before. "You're too tense." "I'm trying," I replied. But my words felt hollow. The slight tension between us was impossible to ignore, and my thoughts raced between what was happening and what should have been happening in a normal situation. Her hand slid over my chest, slowing down for a moment, and I noticed her fingers lingered a little longer. I unconsciously held my breath. trying to focus on something else. But the atmosphere in the room had become so thick. It felt like it could be cut with a knife. Then, unexpectedly, Liz leaned toward me. Her face just inches from mine. I could see her eyes. Deep and mysterious. And feel her breath on my skin. For a second, it seemed like time had stopped. Her touch on my shoulder became even softer. Almost weightless. "Are you okay?" she asked again. But this time her voice was almost a whisper. I nodded, unable to speak. And in that moment, something happened that I never expected. Liz slowly leaned down and pressed her lips to mine. It was a quick, light kiss. Almost like the touch of air. I didn't know what to do. Every bit of logic inside me screamed that this shouldn't have happened. But inside, I felt as though the moment had taken hold of me. Her lips were warm, soft, and for a brief instant, the whole world disappeared. I wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come. Inside, a storm of contradictions raged. Liz pulled away, her face calm. But I saw something more in her eyes. An uncertainty she was trying to hide. Silence fell over the room again. Only the muted sounds of music and our breathing broke the strange moment. "I'm sorry," she whispered, stepping back. I tried to smile, but my thoughts were too tangled to respond. After that kiss, I lay still, trying to comprehend what had just happened. My mind raced between reality and what I had just felt. Liz stepped back a few paces, her hands nervously touching the table with the massage oils. For a moment, I thought she regretted what she had done. But there was something else in her eyes. A mixture of fear and curiosity. As if she herself didn't know what to expect from her actions. I sat up, feeling the tension in my body, which she had just helped to ease, returning with new force. The air in the room had grown heavy, as if every breath was filled with unanswered questions. I looked at her, and our eyes met again. But now, there was not only confusion in that gaze. I saw that Liz was just as lost as I was. She hesitated, searching for words. I shouldn't have. Her voice was quiet. And it seemed like she was speaking more to herself than to me. I tried to speak, but the words stuck in my throat. Something about this situation turned my usual understanding of how such moments should unfold upside down. I didn't want to pretend nothing had happened. But I also didn't know how to proceed. Liz looked at her hands as if noticing them for the first time. Then sighed, trying to regain control of the situation. She took a few steps back as if giving me space. But there was still this invisible connection between us. That was a mistake, she continued, as if trying to convince herself we shouldn't have done that. It's wrong. I could see that she was fighting with herself. And that struggle was reflected in every movement. But something inside me told me that it wasn't so simple. That kiss hadn't been just a random action. There was something more to it. Something neither of us could understand just yet. I got off the massage table, trying to remain calm. My heart was beating faster than usual. But I tried not to show my nervousness. Liz stood across from me, and I could feel the tension between us growing with every second. "Liz," I began, not knowing how to finish the thought. "I don't know what that was. But I feel like you feel it too." She froze for a moment, her eyes widening as if my words had taken her by surprise. She tried to respond, but fell silent, looking away. The room was filled with silence. Only the faint sound of music reminding us that we were still here. In the real world and not in some parallel space where time and rules no longer existed. "It's wrong," she repeated. But her voice no longer sounded so sure. "We can't let this go any further." I took a step forward, closing the distance between us. There was no need for words. Everything that was happening was clear without them. The room was filled with silence. But this silence was louder than any words. Between Liz and me, there hung an invisible wall that we were both afraid to break through. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as if it were about to burst out. We stood facing each other, and time seemed to stretch into eternity. "I don't know what we should do," she finally whispered. Her voice barely audible, but it held genuine concern. Liz looked like she wanted to leave, but something held her in place. I understood that we were both on the edge of something that could change us both. I felt the same uncertainty she did. But now I didn't want to shy away from the moment. We had already gone too far to simply forget about it. "Maybe it was a mistake," I said, realizing my words could be painful for both of us. But it didn't happen for nothing. Liz looked at me, and her eyes met mine. In that moment, I saw the same struggle within her that I was feeling inside. We both knew we couldn't just turn away and pretend nothing had happened. We can't change what's already happened. I continued stepping forward. But that doesn't mean we have to hide from it. She froze, not taking her eyes off me. And I realized she felt this moment too. No matter how much she tried to maintain distance, no matter how much she fought with herself, her inner conflict was obvious. We were both standing on the edge, and a decision had to be made. Her voice trembled, and she took a step back, as if trying to protect herself from her own vulnerability. But I couldn't stop. Everything that had been happening had led us to this moment. And despite all the doubts, I felt that it was important. More important than any right or wrong decision. Liz sighed, her arms falling to her sides. And I saw the tension slowly drain from her face. She took a step forward without saying a word. And then, as if everything had been predestined, I gently placed my hands on her shoulders. Our eyes met once again. And in that moment, everything changed. I felt the remaining doubts dissolve into the air. It was a moment of pure silence, where nothing existed but the two of us. She didn't pull away, didn't turn her face. Instead, her hand softly rested on my back, and I could feel her relaxing into my embrace. We stood like that for several seconds that felt like an eternity. There were no words, and there was no need to explain anything. This was the end of something, and the beginning of something new. Something unknown, but significant. We stood there in silence, enveloped in the strange, intimate moment that neither of us had planned. The tension that had built up between us over the past few minutes seemed to dissipate, leaving only the soft reality of our connection. I didn't know what to expect next, and I could see the same uncertainty reflected in Liz's eyes. But neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. "I don't know what this means," she finally whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "But we can't pretend it didn't happen." I nodded, my throat dry, unsure of how to respond. The weight of what had just occurred hung in the air like a thick fog. I could feel the pull between us, the quiet understanding that something fundamental had shifted. Yet I still couldn't make sense of it. "Maybe it's better if we don't try to understand," I said softly, more to myself than to her. "Some things just happen. Maybe they don't need an explanation." She looked at me for a long moment, her eyes searching mine for some kind of reassurance. But there was none to be given. We had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and we both knew it. Liz took a deep breath, as if she was trying to calm herself, and then slowly stepped back. Her gaze flickered to the floor, and for the first time since the session had started, she looked vulnerable. "Unsure. I think we should stop here," she said quietly. I don't want to make things more complicated than they already are. I nodded, though something inside me protested. I knew she was right. This had gone far enough. But a part of me wasn't ready to let go of the connection we had just experienced. Yeah. Maybe you're right. I finally agreed, though my voice lacked conviction. We stood in the room for another moment, the air heavy with the weight of everything left unsaid. Then Liz slowly turned away, heading for the door. I watched her, feeling a mix of regret and relief. This wasn't how I had imagined my day would go. But I couldn't deny the impact of what had just transpired. Before she reached the door, Liz paused and turned to look at me one last time. "Take care," she said softly, her voice filled with an emotion I couldn't quite place. "You too," I replied, feeling an odd sense of finality in those words. She walked out, leaving me alone in the room, surrounded by the fading scent of lavender and the distant sound of music. I stood there for a few more moments, trying to process everything that had just happened. But it felt surreal, like a dream I had just woken up from. I gathered my things, my mind still replaying the last few minutes over and over. As I left the salon, I couldn't help but wonder what this meant for me, for Liz, and for the strange connection we had shared. Maybe I would never know.